Good afternoon. If you're on the East Coast, good morning for our West Coast audience, and good evening for all of you joining us from elsewhere in the world. Welcome to the Federal Policy State of Play for Nonprofits. I'm Ben Kershaw with Independent Sector, and as the organization that powers Upswell, just let me say thank you for joining us today for Upswell 2021, and welcome. I'm joined today by Ronda Jackson, the Vice President of Government Affairs at Kaboom, where they work to end place-based inequity for good. Ronda has an illustrious bio in the nonprofit sector, but as you'll hear today, she also serves as co-chair of the nonprofit Infrastructure Investment Advocacy Group. Really glad to have you with us, Ronda. Also by Wes Coulam, the Managing Director at Washington Counsel Ernst & Young. Wes and his team are longtime trusted partners to Independent Sector and to the Charitable Sector. Also helping us out today, she's not on screen with us, but has been driving this whole effort forward, is my colleague Nisha McGee, the Manager of Advocacy, Engagement, and Mobilization at Independent Sector. So before we dive into the substance, let's do a quick review of what we're going to cover today in our 45 minutes. We're going to talk briefly about some of the, I will say, astounding policy achievements that the nonprofit sector has enacted already this year. And we're going to spend a little bit of time digging into one body of work in nonprofit infrastructure that is particularly instructive and interesting. Then we're going to spend some time looking at the current state of play in Washington on federal policy as it impacts the nonprofit sector. Hopefully Wes has changed his slides in the last couple hours because things are always changing. And we'll have some time for Q&A throughout, but we also have some time reserved for Q&A and discussion. So please do submit things through your chat feature or through the Q&A function, and we'll get to them when we best can. So let's talk a little bit about the work that the nonprofit charitable sector, at least those of us at Independent Sector, have been focusing on in 2021. We like to think of these 4 items as 4 R's, as how we've talked about them and thought about them internally. Always helps to have a good mnemonic, right? So there are many, many priorities that the nonprofit sector has needed from the federal government this year. One core area of need has been clearly relief for our sector as we grapple with the ongoing pandemic, with the economic impacts of the pandemic, and with the realization of the profound racial justice crisis that we have long faced as well. We'll talk about some of the achievements in that area in a couple minutes. We also are going to spend a little bit of time, not right now, but later this afternoon on the main stage, talking about the need for representation for the nonprofit sector within every policy conversation. We'll hear at 5 o'clock from Congresswoman Betty McCollum about her efforts to establish a White House office for nonprofits and an affirmative voice within the federal government for the nonprofit sector. It's been a priority of ours this year, and work that is nowhere near the finish line, but that we're really excited about. Additionally, it's not enough to provide relief to the organizations that are providing relief to Americans every day throughout the past year and a half. Our sector has long recognized that we need to rebuild in a better way, in a more equitable way, and in a way that helps nonprofits lift up the communities they serve. We've notched some victories in that area. I'll flag a couple of them really quickly, and Ronda will dig into some of the how on that. Lastly, the regulation and reform of the charitable sector, whether it is through legislation impacting foundations, and some of the laws that govern them, or whether it's through changes to the rules around helping nonprofits engage in advocacy and lobbying and so many other important pieces of systems change. That's an ongoing body of work for us here at IS. And thankfully, I mean, we are here in October, so hopefully we got something to show for this year, and we do. So there have been some policy victories thus far in the nonprofit sector, and we'll see those on the next slide. And I will emphasize that these are victories so far. We'll see that we achieved some significant victories earlier in the year in the relief area for charities. So the Paycheck Protection Program, which was a lifeline for so many nonprofits throughout 2020, it largely left behind nonprofit organizations that were larger, but were divided between multiple locations. And earlier this year, those nonprofits gained eligibility to the Paycheck Protection Program, supporting additional thousands of jobs throughout our sector and additional charitable services for communities in need. We also earlier this year saw an extension and an expansion of the unemployment insurance subsidy for nonprofits who fund their unemployment insurance benefits as employers through a reimbursing model. It's a weedy issue to dig into, but when not addressed, means that many nonprofits in the throes of an economic crisis see their bills to the government go up rather than going down. That's the sort of thing that we can't allow to happen, and was a victory earlier in this year and throughout last year. Furthermore, we talk about nonprofits as employers. There were employer tax credits enacted in 2020 to support the maintenance of employees and to support COVID sick leave for nonprofits. We saw those tax credits extended this year. And I won't spend too much time on my soapbox, but for a long time, tax credits for employers have been structured as income tax credits because legislators forget that there are some significant employers who are exempt from income tax, like the 10% of the workforce that works in nonprofits. So the fact that these tax credits were enacted in a way that allowed nonprofits to take advantage of them and then were extended is a real victory. We have seen the charitable deduction protected this year, and thanks to some really important legwork on the front end from dedicated and savvy partners. It's a battle that we haven't had to spend much time fighting in public this year because it's damaging proposals that we heard on the campaign trail during the 2020 campaign have never really come to light as policymakers, including many in the administration, have chosen to look elsewhere. We've proven that maybe we might be more trouble than it would be worth to come after the charitable deduction, and we'll take that. Lastly, the legislation that we alluded to in the spring of this year, the American Rescue Plan, contains some significant funding for a number of priorities that support civic and community infrastructure. I won't list them all. Some of them appear here on the slide, and I won't step on our conversation later in our time today. But we have significant opportunity to add to this list in the we'll say in the weeks, maybe the months to come. So a lot of wins for the sector thus far, but we're really glad today to be talking about how we achieved those victories and how we're going to put more points on the board in the months to come. So I want to turn now to Ronda Jackson, who has co-led, as I noted, so much of this civic infrastructure work to talk about how all of these remarkable victories happen. So I'll turn it over to you, Ronda.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that great overview and introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today at Upswell and at this session. My name is Ronda Jackson, and I am the Vice President of Government Affairs at Kaboom. As Ben said, Kaboom is a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to end place, space, and equity for good. We describe and define place, space, and equity as lack of access to quality play spaces for kids living in historically disinvested communities. And we are solving that problem by working with community organizations to build kid design and community play spaces in those communities. I really want to spend time today, as Ben said, to talk about the NIAG, to give you guys an overview of what the Nonprofit Infrastructure Investment Advisory Group is. And also we'll have a little Q&A about that as well. So what is the NIAG? The Nonprofit Infrastructure Advisory Group, AKA the NIAG, is a coalition of diverse leaders from across the nonprofit sector. We now have about 50 members, and it was co-founded by Kaboom and independent sector, and we have been leading and building this wonderful coalition for the past 18 months. Why does the NIAG exist, you might add? So, we know that when most people, particularly congressional leaders, think about infrastructure, they think about roads and bridges. And we think that's right, but we think it's equally right and important to think about the nonprofit sector as infrastructure, because at the end of the day, it is the nonprofit sector that is delivering the services to communities in need, be those services are healthcare or education or the arts. It's really the nonprofit sector that is that service delivery mechanism for providing services to communities in need. So the NIAG really exists to position to policymakers that we believe that our sector is a critical infrastructure. So the NIAG exists to do two things, basically. The first thing we exist to is to make a case, is to really tell the story to congressional policymakers about the nonprofit sector as infrastructure, so that when congressional leaders are thinking about investing in the infrastructure of this country, they are thinking about investing in the nonprofit sector and making sure that our sector is robust and is vibrant and has what it needs to deliver those critical services. The second thing that we're here to do as the NIAG is to make a list. And so we've made the case, and now we're going to be making a list. And that list consists of our funding priorities, what we want Congress to move forward through whatever legislative vehicles are out there right now. As you can imagine, we're very focused on reconciliation and the infrastructure package. But those funding priorities of the NIAG make up our policy agenda. And then as a coalition, we are advocating collectively for those funding priorities and for those investments to be made in our sector. Let's move to the next slide. We're going to move right through this slide so that you can see all of these three areas. So perfect, you can stop right there. So the NIAG has policy priorities that fall into these three buckets. The first one is civic infrastructure, and that really is the practices that knit together the fabric of our nation and create conditions for social change. That includes charitable giving, voting, national service, the census. The next bucket is community infrastructure. And those are those public assets that anchor strong, vibrant, resilient, equitable communities, such as parks and playgrounds, housing, childcare. And then last bucket is national critical infrastructure. And that's the infrastructure that's just really critical to our daily lives and to the functioning of our economy, such as internet access, broadband, clean energy, clean water, clean power. So those are the things that really make up our funding priorities: the civic infrastructure, the community infrastructure, and also that critical national infrastructure. The next two slides really show who the members are of the NIAG. And you can see from these two slides that it is a real diverse group of organizations that are coming together to advocate on behalf of our sector. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Ben for a little bit of Q&A, particularly about the NIAG.
Thank you, Rhonda. So yes, I will invite folks to drop questions in the Q&A, but I know we'll find them in the chat as well if you put them there. And so, Rhonda, let me start. Let me take privilege of first question here. How does the NIAG operate? Right, we haven't been meeting in person much lately. How does the NIAG do its work?
That's a great question. Yeah, the NIAG started during COVID times, so we started on Zoom and we're continuing to meet that way. We meet monthly for about 90 minutes. Our meetings are really structured because we found that that's best for the group. So we kind of start our meetings with the real legislative updates from Wes, you'll hear about later in his group. We also really tap into the expertise of this diverse group of members. So we know that independent sector and Kaboom are not experts on all things nonprofit. And so when we are developing our policy priorities and our policy agenda, and even during our meetings, we tap into the experts of our members and expertise of our members and have them come in and share on different policy recommendations that fall into their area of expertise. The NIAG also has experts come in and speak to the group. We have people from the Hill come in. We have folks from the administration come in. And so it's a constant just kind of dialogue within our meetings and then between the meetings as we are looking at the legislative vehicles that are coming through and determining which of those policy priorities linked to those legislative vehicles and developing our evolving policy agenda. And then just on a real practical level, we use email and Zoom and Google Docs to communicate with our members and to give folks the opportunity to weigh in on our policy recommendations as they are being drafted.
Got it. So I mean, right, this is in some ways a new thing. In some ways, a coalition is the oldest thing conceivable in this town. But it's been new, I'll say, for independent sector because in part for a number of reasons, in part because we're a membership organization. And this is a coalition that that is not limited to IS members. So it's a body of work we've dug into in a different way. It's also, I'll say from where IS sits, it's expansive, right? You alluded to us not being experts on a lot of these issues. So, in many ways it is new, and, with new things, we do some things great and we learn some things from things we don't do great. I won't ask you to drag all your dirty laundry, out, but what have you learned from the work of the NIAG?
I was thinking about this earlier. My co-chair, Jeff Moore, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Independent Sector, every time most of the time that he sends an email from him and I to the group, he'll put in the tagline that we're stronger together. And I think that's definitely one thing that I've learned, that we can do this, that the nonprofit sector can come together and advocate for itself as a sector. I was hoping that would be possible, but I wasn't really sure when we started this, but it definitely sounded like a good idea. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that we can do this. We can come together across kind of cross-cutting concerns and really advocate for the sector as a sector. We can advocate for the sector as infrastructure. which is a new thing for us to do as a sector. It was new for me, and I know new for independent sector. I also think we've really learned that there is a real hunger for a kind of space where we can come together as a sector and learn from each other and develop policy positions together. Folks show up ready to talk and to debate things. And that is exciting for me leading this coalition. I think we also learned that, it's important to keep this open to folks from small organizations, from large organizations. We hear a lot about kind of the new power and the old power. And I think what happens in the NIAG is both of those things are coming together. This kind of new power and old power in the nonprofit sector are coming together under one voice. And so it's okay if your organization is not a member of NIAG. You can reach out to independent sector after Upswell is over, because they're really busy right now, and join us and learn about how we work together. And yeah, I'm not going to air all the dirty laundry, but there have been times, as Ben, when members have been reticent about some positions that we've wanted to take because it either didn't seem like it was close enough to what they maybe do or what they understand. And so I've learned that if we are asking for feedback from the members, we can take the temperature of the group via surveys or conversations and really see, okay, where are we? And then create opportunities for dialogue and for folks to come together. We can get to a set of policy positions that this 50 member diverse group can come to. And so, having that healthy tension within the group, but then creating that dialogue for us to remember that it is about advocating for our sector as a whole, that's the most important.
Got it. So we've got some questions coming in through the chat. Mostly people beating down the doors who want to join NIAG. And there's, you can email Jeff Moore on the NIAG, through the NIAG website. We welcome it to answer someone else's question. It's open to, as we alluded to, you don't have to be an IS member or a part of the Kaboom community to join the coalition. So Ronda, we have an additional question about how priorities are set for the coalition. And you alluded to some of this, but let me see what else you have to say about it. How are the priorities set? Do they always align with IS priorities and Kaboom priorities, I think? And how do you ensure the needs of small nonprofit organizations are met, as well as the big national groups?
Well, I think I don't know if we can go back to those 3 buckets, but those buckets were really set by the coalition members that were a part of the group in the early days, when we really said, hey, what are 3 areas that we can define as infrastructure that impact the sector as a whole? And so these are not IS priorities per se, they're not Kaboom priorities. They are priorities that align with what we believe is infrastructure and what we believe are the infrastructure functions of the nonprofit sector, and where all of our members could feel as if their priority areas fit into that. And so those 3 buckets are set. I think kind of what happens as far as legislation is concerned, the different legislation vehicles that are coming through, we're then kind of diving into those pieces of legislation and figuring out, okay, which one of them falls into one of our buckets, and then what's the position that we want to take that is best for the sector. And we hear from our members to say, hey, we want to make sure that we're advocating for this around childcare or for this around clean water. And then we come together and develop, what our policy message is going to be, what we're going to put out in our letters, in our op-eds, in the ways that we are advocating to Congress.
Great, thank you. So we're going to turn away from this work now for the moment, or we're going to turn to a different part of this work with Wes. please continue to submit questions or thoughts through the chat and the Q&A, and we have a few minutes at the end also to come back to them. So, Wes, Ronda alluded to great ongoing work. There's also work, I think, happening in Congress and in the rest of Washington, D.C. these days. We're really glad to have you give us an overview of the state of play at the moment.
Sure, Ben, thanks. Good to be with you and Ronda on this presentation and program. So we'll spend a few minutes kind of talking about what is on the agenda for Congress and administration. Obviously, there are a lot of things happening, so we can't cover everything, but we'll kind of give a quick update of kind of what items are on the front burner in DC and Washington and in Congress, and what we see getting done potentially this year on the agenda, especially those things that impact the nonprofit sector. So before we do that, we kind of set a little background information on kind of what's impacting the policy-making process, right? In order to pass legislation through Congress, you must have the votes. In order to have the votes, you must round up support for your policies. So right now we have a division of power that's making it difficult to move things through easily through the House and Senate and to the president's desk. Obviously, this is the first year of President Biden's year in office, and so him and his administration are eager to move their agenda through and get it through Congress. But they have a divided, closely divided division of power in the House and the Senate. Particularly in the Senate, where you have 50-50 split, Democrats and Republicans. That makes it challenging to move through an ambitious agenda like President Biden wants to move through the Congress. And there's only a handful of votes available to him in the House, given the close margins also in the House. So that kind of sets the stage for what can get done and what priorities and policies can get done right now through Congress. Obviously, the first year is important to the new administration, but also they're always looking forward to the next election in 2022 and urgency to get things done this year before the election year season digs into full swing in 2022. So kind of on the next slide, we talk about kind of what are the items in play, kind of pending and upcoming in Congress. So we really have, as Ron was talking about, the Niag's agenda has been talking about infrastructure issues that go, broadly speaking, impact the sector and more broadly. So there's two big bills Congress is in the middle of considering. One is a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It has traditional infrastructure spending items in it, roads, bridges, etc. About $1 trillion in funding, about $500 billion in new additional funding above and beyond the current baseline from previous years. That bill has passed the Senate on a bipartisan basis. However, it is stuck in the House until they're able to reach an agreement on a second larger bill, the Build Back Better plan that President Biden has been pushing for in the last several months. We're also seeing that the infrastructure bill that passed the Senate has broadband funding in it, for example, $55 billion in new funding for broadband expansion, energy efficiency grants, clean drinking water expansion funding, etc. Things in there that are important to the sector. It also would retroactively at this stage repeal the employee retention tax credit. Has been impactful to many employers, including nonprofit employers, retaining their employees and getting a tax credit as their payroll tax for that. We've also seen the federal government, the appropriations process has been delayed and pushed out to December 3rd, as well as the debt limit has been extended to December as well. So we have kind of those big issues hanging out there in the future as well. Let's focus on this bigger item, the Build Back Better plan, this reconciliation bill that President Biden and the Democrats have been pushing to move through the House and the Senate. The House put together a $3.5 trillion plan that has a host of new spending for programs for housing, for child care, climate change, energy provisions in there as well. That plan has faced some roadblocks in getting the votes necessary to pass it through both the House, the full House, as well as importantly, getting it through the 50-50 split in the Senate. And what's happening now is you've had ongoing negotiations taking place between President Biden, Senate leadership and House leadership, and a couple key moderates, Senator Manchin of West Virginia and Senator Sinema of Arizona, who have been raising concerns about the size of the package and the tax increases and tax provisions to offset the cost of this package in the bill. So what we're seeing right now is that $3.5 trillion package is unlikely to get, will not get a vote in the House and Senate, but will need to be reduced in size and brought back to a much smaller number in order to have the votes to pass it through the House and the Senate going forward. So what are some of the things that we're looking at? Maybe we can look at the next slide, kind of talk about what is in that $3.5 trillion package and what could be potentially cut or modified in that package in order to get it through the House and the Senate. So kind of here you have kind of the different buckets of various spending areas for that $3.5 trillion package. Education, healthcare, social safety net, housing support, agricultural, infrastructure funding, other spaces, as well as child care support and child care funding. So a lot of things across the board in this package. So what we are seeing is that they're going to have to find a way to scale that package back down. Senator Manchin, for one, has said he's interested in seeing a package about $1.5 trillion in size, maybe willing to go closer to $1.9 trillion. The president's trying to bring him back up. That still means about $1.5 to $2 trillion of funding needs to be reduced in this package. So what are the things they've decided to cut? They're kind of cutting out free community college out of this plan. We're hearing they're going to scale back the child tax credit to be only for 1 year rather than several years. Also, the paid family paid leave will be reduced from 12 weeks, potentially to 4 weeks only, as a way to save revenue or save spending from that, and also scale back in some of the climate change initiatives in there to put more emphasis on some of the renewable energy tax credits that are also in the package here as it goes forward. So right now, we're kind of in the middle of negotiation between the House and the Senate, focusing mostly on Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin to get their votes to secure the 50 votes necessary to pass this bill through the House and through the Senate by the end of this year. We're trying to get a deal by the end of this month. I think that's probably unlikely. We'll probably see this move into November timeframe, unless they can reach something very quickly the next week or so on an overall package. Other things that we're thinking about that could be changed here is the tax offsets. Right now, you have increases in the corporate tax rate, individual tax rates for high-income individuals. There's also reasons to be talked about IRS reporting people's bank information as a way to raise revenue to go after tax information reporting. That's also on the table. So we're going to see a lot of more conversations about what's in and out of this package as they try to reach agreement over the next several weeks going forward. All right, let's kind of go and kind of finish up the next slide here and talk about what are some of the key players to watch in this conversation. As I mentioned, you have Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema trying to negotiate a package that they can agree with in the Senate. You also have other senators that are up for re-election in 2022 concerned about the package as well. You have some other moderate Democrats in the House who have concerns about some of the provisions in the package, as well as you have the more progressive members of the Democrat caucus in the House who are pushing for a more robust and more aggressive package and want to see their priorities included in the package. Speaker Pelosi, I think Chairman Neal has been talking about maybe doing fewer items in the bill, but to keep them as robust rather than saying we scale back everything and make it temporary and smaller in order to fit the $3.5 trillion package into a $1.5 trillion package. So more to come on that. We're going to watch as this plays out. But I think that in the day, they should get a package done by the end of the year. It will have some robust tax incentives for families, for child care, some spending items in there as well, offset by additional tax increases as part of this conversation. So I'll stop there and happy to kind of answer any questions about the details of the package or any other ideas about the process or how we see things playing out.
Thank you, Wes. We appreciate it very much. Always especially interesting to see who the key players are, who's going to be in the room where it happens. So we're going to move now to 10, maybe even 11 minutes of questions and discussion. We're really running on time today. And so we encourage you to continue to submit questions through the Q&A in the chat. One very specific question that Wes, I'll turn to first. You mentioned the elimination of the fourth quarter of the ERTC. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, so that first bipartisan infrastructure bill that has passed the Senate and is awaiting action in the House did contain a number of provisions to offset the cost of additional funding in that package. And one of those provisions would sunset the employee retention tax credit that was enacted earlier this year, that is set to be, it will go through December 31st of 2021. In this bill, it would sunset that provision in September 30th. So basically cutting off the fourth quarter availability of that credit for employers across the board, nonprofit and for-profit employers. Unfortunately, that is in there as an offset. It was negotiated between the House between the President and some of the moderate members in the Senate, get the votes to pass it in the Senate. If they do pass that bill by October 30th, that would be a retroactive repeal of that provision for the fourth quarter, which I think will put some employers, certainly some small employers, and those who are not aware of this, a tough situation if they continue to take advantage of that retention credit beyond September 30th. And so there's concern about that. I don't see the bill being modified or changed. I think the view is they're going to have to pass it as it is to the House in order to pass it on to the President, but possibly there'll be some conversation about maybe doing some relief in further legislation beyond that. But right now, it will be a tough situation for employers who rely upon that if it gets retroactively repealed as part of that infrastructure bill that could pass by the end of October.
Thank you, Wes. I'll say independent sector's perspective on the infrastructure bill as a whole. I mean, you heard how many things are in there that we and the civic infrastructure community are excited about. Our posture, our statement has been, this bill contains a lot of important things. We encourage you to pass it and immediately fix it. Whether that's done through reconciliation or any other means, it's not our job to say how this gets fixed. We understand that the people who cut that deal probably thought the bill would be enacted well before the fourth quarter, which would have made it maybe slightly less damaging than having it retroactively yanked away. We were encouraged to see 17 members of the House of Representatives about a week ago write in support of maintaining the full ERTC. I think I would personally be happy to see the full ERTC restored for the fourth quarter. If they can only come up with the funding and the offsets to restore it for the nonprofit sector, which did not get some of the other relief provisions that were provided over the course of last year and earlier this year. We think there would be plenty of justification for doing that as well. So we'll continue to push to fix that. But yeah, thank you, Wes, for laying that out so clearly. That is a concerning aspect of it. So we have another question, and I will again encourage folks to continue submitting questions. We have a few minutes. So we have another question that I'm scrolling to right now about how the nonprofit sector can engage board members specifically as advocates for infrastructure and for the office on the nonprofit sector. What are we doing to educate, engage, and to activate them? So let me take a crack at this one. I think it's an excellent question and an important one. We collectively, I don't think, have the perfect answer to how we unlock the full advocacy potential of board members. I'm guessing that's not a controversial statement. I think that as we think about at IS, we think about engaging advocates nationwide around these priorities, certainly around the Office for a Nonprofit Sector. So much of advocacy mobilization is about meeting people where they are and making things doable for them. I don't know, it has to be making things easy for people, right? But giving them something that needs to get done and how they fit in to that picture. As you will hear this evening at 5 o'clock when you join Congresswoman McCollum on the main stage to talk about the legislation that she is working on. Independent sector is mobilizing, fully behind that, and we believe that the nonprofit sector does need a seat at the table, and we have developed messaging and will be activating to the best extent we can every piece of the charitable sector to mobilize around this. And we hope that you all will engage your networks and your board members around that effort, that you all tell us what you need in order to engage your networks and engage your board members. There's plenty of grassroots work to do. There are lots of other things that need to be done to move this forward. So we do hope that people will take a look at that, and that you will sign up to join that campaign, and that you will get your board members to sign up to join that campaign as well. So again, we have a few more minutes for questions. Wes, I have a question for you about the news as we've seen it over the past few days. I won't ask you to dig in too much to the soap opera about Joe Manchin leaving the Democratic Party. Always interested in your take on that. But it seems like we've seen that reporting, and then we've seen a lot of other, very positive, constructive, we're not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction, bromides. What is your sense about this, kind of how close they are to the finish line? I mean, we're intensely interested in the content, but we're also interested in the process itself. Are they getting close? How do you see things playing out? We won't hold you to any of these promises, but we're always interested in your sense of it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a tough situation in the sense that you have, a couple members who are kind of being the ones holding up the process for the rest of the members, right? In many cases, you have kind of more groups of members, blocks of members kind of pushing for different issues. In this case, you have there's basically one or two making their concerns known. So the focus and spotlight's been on them. Senator Manchin, as you mentioned, Senator Sinema are kind of the two that are in the spotlight at the moment, with a lot of focus on what they want to get their votes to become yes. It gives them a lot of leverage in the process because of the 50-50 Senate. So that's kind of where we are right now with the president. I think engaging more robustly on this, on the lobbying on this issue to get a place where Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema can get to yes. I think we're maybe getting closer to an agreement on an overall framework, but I think we're a ways away from actually tuning this to get the details and the various provisions put together enough for them to vote in the next week or two. I think this is going to be several more weeks of conversation and get to a place where they can vote on it to pass it. Maybe we'll see high level agreement by the end of this week or first part next week, but getting it to a place where they can then vote on it in the House and Senate, get it passed, is going to take a little more time on this process. There's been concerns about the offsets. You got to think about it's a big package. You have to then figure out the policy. You also then, I think the promise from both the president and leadership has been to pay for it. and so it doesn't add to the deficit. We've seen deficits explode quite a bit last year or two, and so they're trying to be fiscally responsibly as much as they can. So they want to raise revenue and raise taxes to pay for the package. That's also challenging because nobody wants to raise taxes too far and too aggressively. So we're trying to find the right balance to make the policy work. That's going to take a little bit more time.
Thank you. And I know that speaking of time, we're very short on it. Rhonda Jackson, a lightning round question for you on the really simple issue of voting. Is the Niag touch voting policy?
Yes. The real quick response is that yes, the Niag has a position on election integrity and full access to voting, and we believe that all nonprofits, regardless of its mission, should be in support of this. And we have put out some statements, independent sector as well, today put out a statement about voting and voting access, and it's clearly vital for the nonprofit sector as a whole.
Thank you. Yeah, you talked about that fabric that knits our communities, right? It feels like that. So with that, I will end our discussion and close with a thank you to my esteemed presenters and partners, and thank you to all of you. We don't want you to be late for the 2 o'clock main stage. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for joining us at Upswell. We look forward to staying in touch, and that's how you can right there on the screen. So thanks again.